Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really delighted for today's guest, John Abrams from Massachusetts, and he is the author of From Founder to Future. He's going to talk to us all about the path to employee entrepreneurship, business, and I'm really happy to have him on and to discuss his work. So, John, welcome.
Well, it's great to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And briefly introduce yourself, and I'm really excited to dive into the questions.
So I started a company called South Mountain Company when I was 23 years old in 1973. And we had no intention of being in business, but it became very compelling, something I'm passionate about. And it became an integrated architecture, building, and solar company. In 1987, I transferred ownership to my employees because some of them wanted to stay for their careers, but they wanted more of a stake. And that turned out to be a hinge point in the company's history. And it was incredibly rewarding. So I stayed on for 35 years. And in 2022, I passed it on to second generation leadership and I retired. But I am hardly retired. So I started writing this book. And I work with companies, guiding them in the transition from proprietary ownership to employee ownership. It's my new gig.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed the book. And one thing is talking about is one question I have for you is, clients that come to you, do they come to you for the book or do they come to you for advice in transferring ownership to employees? How do your clients work with you?
So the book is not even out yet. It's just coming out next week. Although it is around, there are a few thousand copies out. But people come to me because they know me in some other capacity. And over the years, I have helped people that guide people to employee ownership. And so this network has built up. And so now that I'm available to do that, some people come to me. And some people, many people come to me and I refer them to others through this work of doing this book. I've come to know such a wide variety of people in the employee ownership arena. And so I have wonderful people to refer others to.
Interesting. Yeah. And for the listeners and viewers, John's book and the links will be in the show notes. One question I have for you is what sort of businesses or business structures are good for employee ownership? Because if you look at like traditional corporations, you have like sometimes you get, stocks or options, but what percentage of people are actually employing this model?
So it's a small percentage, but worldwide, it's a large, large number. And in the US, the most common form of employee ownership is the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan. There are roughly 6,000 of them, 12, 13 million employees. But the two others, and two that really interest me, is the worker co-op, which is what my company became. And in 1987, when we converted to the worker co-op, there were only about a dozen in the US. And there are roughly 1,000 now. But worldwide, it is the most common form of employee ownership. And there are great concentrations in northern Italy and Spain. In Spain, there's a group of cooperatives, the Mondragon co-ops, that employ 70,000 people. So it's growing. And then there's a newer form of employee ownership called the Employee Ownership Trust, which is very common in Great Britain for the last 100 years, but it has just come to the US last 10 years, I'd say, but it's gaining great traction.
Interesting.
So there are real choices, and different forms of employee ownership appeal to different people.
Yeah. And so when you talk about different forms of employee ownership, what are obviously this is only 30 minutes, but, what are some of the factors or considerations when considering what type of plan to go with?
First of all, I would say one thing, Chris, that in all three of the main forms of employee ownership, ESOPs, worker co-ops, and employee ownership trusts, every business is so different, and And founders, I mean, what is common, right now, and the reason I wrote this book is that there are 3 million small businesses in the US with over 55 founders. And all of them, there's a great transfer of wealth happening. Next 15 or 20 years, something's going to happen in each of those companies. And many founders that have put 30 years and heart and soul into these businesses would love to see the original mission of the business continue, but they're not aware of some of the options. So what's going to happen to those businesses is that some of them will be passed down in families. Some of them will unceremoniously close the doors, leaving a hole on Main Street because they can't find a buyer. And others will be appealing to private equity, to strategic buyers, and those businesses, the nature of them may change tremendously if they're sold. They may be carved up, they may be taken out of community, they may be sold for parts. I personally know people who have sold their businesses to private equity and ended up with fat wallets and broken hearts. So the reason I wrote this is that business advisors, attorneys and accountants and bankers and financial planners mostly are not aware of the employee ownership options. And when founders are advised of these, they go, oh my God, that's perfect. These are the people that helped me build the business. I would love it to be in their hands. And when they're made aware of the methods for doing that, it becomes more attractive.
Yeah. Interesting. We're going to talk about your book because you talk about the Commonwealth. The other question I have for you is, with the East, are most of these employee ownership plans, are they reserved strictly for private companies, or like
Yes.
how can people like working for publicly traded companies or large corporations take advantage of this
Well,
idea?
they'll have to go to work for somebody else or they'll have to start a company themselves because it really is true employee ownership is really limited to private companies.
Hmm.
And actually, I know some companies that have gone public and then realized that that was not really what they wanted to do and bought back the stock and become private again. Seventh generation is a great example of that.
Yeah. So talking about your book, you introduced the concept of a Commonwealth company, and what did you mean by this?
Well, what I really mean is it's based on 5 transitions that original founders can do. And one of those is the ownership from proprietary to widely shared and accessible to all. Leadership from the original founder to the next generation. Mission, unprotected mission to permanent preservation of purpose, embedding that in the company. Management and governance from top-down control to participatory and democratic. And finally, impact from business as usual to becoming a certified B Corp force for good. I think the B Corp movement has made quite an impact in its short life, 10 or 15 years. There are now 8,000 B Corps worldwide. So this is about making the kind of impact that many people don't even realize is possible.
And you mentioned B Corp. I know some people they've heard of S and C. What are the advantage of becoming a B corporation?
So a B Corp is really a certification method where you go through an assessment to be able to call yourself a B Corp. You have to score a certain number of points. You have to demonstrate, and it's quite a rigorous process and rigorous assessment. You have to demonstrate that you are not just achieving maximum profits, but instead you are really serving a triple bottom line of profit, people, planet, serving all three. So that's the heart of the B Corp idea. And interestingly, B Corp was founded by a company called B Lab, a nonprofit actually. And one of the things they have done is they have made beneficial corporation legislation in I think it's 37 or 38 of the 50 states to date, so that you can register as a beneficial corporation, and that makes it that the business no longer needs to be strictly based on maximizing profit, but also social impact and social good is part of the purpose of the business.
Interesting. So the other question I have is, going back to this idea of Commonwealth, and you talk about the 5 transitions that lead to a Commonwealth company. What are those 5 transitions?
Those are the ones: ownership, leadership, mission, management and governance, and impact that I just kind of described. And what ends up happening is you end up with this. I mean, nobody achieves all of them fully, but it's an aspiration, and the goalposts might be far down the field, but everybody can be working on those transitions and moving toward them. And then the Commonwealth Company, as I perceive them, they employ constant learning and improvement with generally loose steering and control to create continuity, to create longevity, to create resilience, to create impact, and to create equity.
Interesting. The other question I have for you is, as employee ownerships, you talk about the positive impacts of our economy and our democracy. Why don't more businesses employ this form of ownership? Is it just they don't know, or just kind of the owners? Talk about why people are not doing this more frequently.
I think it's really, Chris, I think it's lack of knowledge. And because the appeal is pretty widespread when people know about it as an option and as an option to exit. And certainly, when I talk about those 3 million companies with employees that are owned by founders over 55 years old, 32 million employees work in those companies, and they have helped to build the companies, and they want to share in. And when you share that wealth, you get commitment, you get performance. And when you start to make a democratic workplace, it tends to spill over into people's lives and how they into their civic lives and how they act in community. It's really a way of spreading the democracy that right now is frankly threatened. I mean, these are bizarre times that we live in. In a certain way, I feel like this book is an antidote to the current American spirit, which I see as one of cruelty, not generosity, one of cynicism and resentment, not optimism and love. And obviously, I mean, that's a spirit that has bedeviled us at times in our history, but it's always been overcome by our better hearts and minds. And I'm certain that that will happen this time too. So, in a way, this book is an ode to the America to come, the one where we all share the bounty and the respect. And so that's the message. That's the story. That's the hope. And as I wrote this book, Chris, I mean, I just heard incredible stories from people that had discovered the way we did in 1987, this different way of doing business. I'll tell you a great example of that. So, not far from me on Cape Cod, where fishing is a big industry, the fishermen of Chatham, a small town in Cape Cod, were, who all talked to each other, and they were complaining to each other about how the wholesalers had lowered the price and it was getting lower and lower. And they said, why don't we get together and all make our prices? So they went to an attorney, and the attorney said, well, you can't do that. That's collusion. You can't get together on price. But if you were a cooperative, you could. You could legally do just that. And so 17 of them at this point own what's called the Chatham Harvesters Co-op, and they own this business and they all set the prices together. And they're serving the community in new ways because of banding together. They have a community supported fishery. You can be a member. They're starting to use lesser known species. And they didn't know this was possible. They had no clue that this was possible. And it has been remarkably successful.
Yeah. It's amazing. I think you were talking about the growing divide and kind of the cynicism, because of the corporate and political greed in our society is rampant, corruption, fraud. One question I have for you is, a lot of entrepreneurs, small business owners, they're listening or watching, and like they're still in the early stages. They're like, yeah, I may not, I'm not sure. Once I don't know if I'm going to pass this business on to my family, if I'm going to shut doors or get acquired, or where what the factors, like when should they start thinking about ESOPs and employee ownership plans? Should be even before they start the business, during, or when they meet a certain size? Talk about those factors and considerations.
I advise people to be talking about and thinking about succession planning right now, no
Mm.
matter where you are. If you are a startup, if you are at mid-career, if you're getting ready to retire, succession planning is huge. And most small businesses have no succession plan at all. All of a sudden, the owner goes, I'm getting ready to retire. What am I going to do? So I say start right now. And I also go further and say, changing ownership and changing leadership are two very different things. And the ownership is more transactional and easier to accomplish. And I suggest that people do transfer ownership mid-career and then leave a healthy runway to the leadership succession. So if I'm the owner of a business and I sell it to my employees and I stay on as the CEO running that business, then I am helping this new cooperative or ESOP or trust. I'm helping it to succeed by developing internal leadership so that when the time comes when I'm truly ready to walk out that door, we are all ready. So at South Mountain Company, we spent 7 years thinking about the leadership transition and 3 years, the last 3 years, working incredibly hard to develop the leadership capacities we needed in a very intentional way. And we had a very aligned leadership team of 6 people that included me. And we were so ready when my retirement date, 6 months before, we kind of looked around each other and we go, oh my God, I think we've done this thing. And we got 6 months to just polish the mirror and make sure we've got everything aligned so that when I left, when I retired, it was like 6 people became 5. It was like I slipped out in the night because they were just so prepared to run this company.
Excellent. How can people connect with you, find out more about you, learn from you, check out the book, and reach out to you?
So on my website, abramsangel.com, and angel has 2 L's. Abramsangel, 2 L's.com. There is it not only describes what we do for services, but it also has a good description of the book and a sample chapter and endorsements. So abramsangel.com, it's all right there.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for a very fantastic conversation, and keep up the great work.
Chris, you too. Thanks so much for having me.